Hey everyone, we're back for another teardown, this time of the 2080 Ti reference card, or the Founders Edition card as they call it these days, what with the confusing prices and all that. So the Founders Edition card has taken quite a change from the previous reference card NVIDIA designs, the first major change for them in many years. And the biggest change, obviously, is going dual axial cooler instead of a single radial fan or blower fan. And that is what we've been sort of questioning in terms of NVIDIA's motive of, does it push some of the lower end AIB partner cards out of the market? And we'll see what it does in terms of the rest of the market. But for the card itself, it is somewhat necessary because this is a lot of power and a blower fan is just not going to cut it. And they've instead gone for dual axial fans. This card for the cooler is identical to the 2080. For the PCB, there are some differences. We'll talk about that later. But for today, we're just going to take this apart, go through the different screws if you want to take yours apart for a liquid cooling mod or something like that, and also talk about the power solution and the VRM. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Thermaltake Level 20 VT Micro ATX case. The Level 20 VT takes the high-quality Level 20 design and makes it more affordable, and shrinks it down to a Micro ATX form factor at that. With fully modular paneling, it's possible to rearrange this case into whatever configuration you prefer. For a Micro ATX case that can be a discussion piece in a home theater system, click the link in the description below. Quick footnote on this, NVIDIA sent out a memo at about 6 p.m., 15 hours before embargo lift, which is very courteous, saying that disassembly was explicitly disallowed, and so we were going to hold this content, but it appears that NVIDIA did not send this memo to all media, only to US media, and it was at 6 p.m. Eastern time, so half the world is already asleep. So very poor organization by NVIDIA, but regardless, it's out there now. Their NDA explicitly states that anything that's in public domain can be talked about, and so we can therefore show our teardown. And there was really no reason not to show it anyway because NVIDIA posted their own 3D graphics of the card taken apart anyway. So very odd decision making on NVIDIA's part, very last minute, and felt extremely targeted. Regardless, let's walk through the card and see what it looks like. It's time to do the teardown. We have a few tools for the job here, not involving tweezers this time, the Verge. Instead, we're going to start with a pair of digital calipers and get the new mounting hole size, because if you're doing a water mod, you probably need that. So this is 98.5-ish. So let's just call it 98. 98 millimeters. Of course, it's going to be squared, yes. 98.5 center to center, so call it 98 millimeters center to center for the hole spacing. So there's your GPU hole spacing. If you are a maker of liquid cooling parts, that'll probably be helpful as well. We are also going to be using our iFixit Protect toolkit, and they haven't been a sponsor for a while for just normal ads, but they do make a good product, and we'll link it below if you want to pick one up, because we're going to need it for this, as it does have some Allen key screws. It's got multiple size Phillips. NVIDIA's reference design cards are typically very complicated just with regard to all the different mounting hardware they use. It's a lot of different screw sizes, totally unnecessary, but it's part of their shishi high-end wannabe design that they go with. So let's just start taking it apart. This one should be pretty straightforward overall. We'll start with some Phillips action and get the cold plate loosened up, but we're not going to completely remove it yet. Most likely underneath these small screws on the other side, they're probably screwing into another screw. That's typically what NVIDIA does. And this card is going to be complex enough that we will be tracking the screw removal on our mod mat, which you can grab on store.gamersnexus.net if you'd like to pick up your own, because there are a lot of screws, so we want to make sure we get them all back in the same spot. For reassembly, we're not going to go over that in this video, but just as a note, these tiny screws that I'm taking out right now, these are extremely easy to break. They use Loctite to mount them. So if you are reassembling with the original cooler, and you screw in just past where it starts getting tight, it'll probably snap at the stem, so don't do that. Just turn it until it stops and do not go any further with these. So that's all the small screws so far, and let's count those up. We have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 of the really small screws. Just laid out. This is how they go back in. This is our anti-static mod mat. It's got a layout of the GPU so we can easily track where they go. And again, is on store.gamersnexus.net if you want to pick one up. They're on back order coming in this week, I think, or the next, so they should be shipping out soon. So let's loosen the rest of these 4 big screws. These are the spring retention screws for the cooler and the cold plate. And you'll see that these are not coming straight out, unlike cards past, which would indicate they're, well, it might come out. It's got like a washer or a hook on the other end of it, so we're going to leave that alone and take off the rest of the backplate first if we can, and then see if there's something holding those in, because I haven't taken this apart yet. So you are seeing the screws and the locations for the first time with me today. Okay, so this backplate is a little bit insane. I'll show you why in a moment. Here's why it's insane. It looks like a whole lot of metal, especially when you look from here, because that looks awfully thick, but in reality, it's a very thin sheet, and you can see that here too. And it even feels plasticky, but it is in fact metal, aluminum. It's got this glossy coating on the inside to prevent any shorts between SMDs that might touch the backplate if some legs poked through or you lost a thermal pad or something. And thermal pads in all the key areas. So we have a thermal pad on the back side of the inductor line over here. We have thermal pads on the back side of the memory, which is fairly common, but not as common as it should be. A thermal pad on the back side of the GPU core itself. And then thermal pads on this side, which is probably an extension of the VRM. So that is most likely going into the left half of the card VRM, depending on your orientation. So let's get the rest of this off. This is the NVLink cover, coveted cover that NVIDIA was very proud of. There's the back plate, not very advanced, but has lots of thermal pads on it, so should actually get used, so that's good. Okay, and then these screws now are coming out easily, so they were just caught on the back side of the back plate. And as called out, it's exactly the same approach as previous FE cards. So NVIDIA is using a set of small hex heads that the small Phillips heads thread into. We'll find out what size that is momentarily. Yep, same size as previously. I believe that would be a 4. That's a 4mm hex driver. So we have an equal amount of these to pull out, something like 14, something like that. And each one corresponds with one of the smaller screws on the other side. These are going into the base plate as well of the card on the top cooler side. Okay, that should be all of the 4mm hex screws. So at this point we have some screws in the I/O plate, and it looks like some of those might go into the shroud. Not 100% clear on that, but typically they don't. So let's try removing it first. If it doesn't come off, there are 2 more screws exposed in here, by the way, but those 2 screws should just be for separating some of the internal components of the shroud and the base plate. So we're going to try and leave everything else alone right now and just see if the card will separate. Actually, can already tell it's not, because this needs to come off. So next step is to remove then the I/O cover, the PCIe expansion cover. And for that, we have a couple screws that go into the base plate and a couple that just go into the I/O areas. So you got 2, 3, 4 probably in the base plate. Okay, so there's the cover removed, which apparently says MO1TO1. Not sure what the meaning of that is, but that's the manufacturing stamp. A whole lot of thermal pads on this. Hell of a lot of thermal pads. I think NVIDIA called EVGA for help with this design. The amount of thermal pads they have here. Here's what we've got. We've got one ribbon cable for everything. So that's fans, it's asynchronous fan control, it's LEDs, all that stuff, all in one. It looks like we have 2 sets of thermal pads for the choke, so there's a blue pad at the bottom, and then some of the center chokes have a more standard NVIDIA style canvas pad, which is probably from Fuji Poly or similar supplier. Normal NVIDIA pads, maybe roughly 3 watts per meter Kelvin pads on everything. So inductor line, chokes right here, inductors right there, MOSFETs, capacitor bank, VRAM still on the card. Then we have capacitor bank, inductors, everything's covered. So they have a lot going on for this. They have all the small SMDs covered. So it's a lot of care going into it, which, considering they're using a vapor chamber that 100% covers this entire surface, this has to be done. Because there is zero airflow here, or very near zero anyway, that gets to the PCB itself. You can see that the fans are entirely obstructed by the base plate. There are no cutouts anywhere, unlike most of the other aftermarket or board partner cards. And that's because NVIDIA is using a giant vapor chamber for their cooler. We'll look at that in a minute. And so because of this layout, if there's not thermal pad contact to the component, it doesn't get cooled ever. So that's their decision making for that. Let's go ahead and clean off the die and some very hardened thermal paste, and then take a look at the assembly of the vapor chamber and the base plate. So same one, K1, same as the other ones we've seen. It's a TU 102-300A K1 part, and then a revision A1. K1 is the signifier for which memory module is missing, which in this case is the same as the ASUS card. It's that one right there. So this is clean enough for now. We'll get the rest later before reassembly. And we'll leave that alone actually for now. So PCB components we'll go over next, but they are ready to look at. First, we want to look at the cooler. And this is where it gets a bit more complex to take apart. So we have Phillips heads on this side. This is going to be one of the longer teardowns. So 2 on the far side that go on the underside of the cooler. We're going to try and keep those isolated so we know where they go later. And there's probably no separation yet. There's not any separation yet. So now we need to start pulling out these Allen keys, and this is the first 20 series Founders Edition I've taken apart. So let's just start with the large ones. Get kind of a base to work off of here, just so that it's not contacting anything, so I don't have to worry about those thermal pads. What size is this? So in our iFixit ProTech toolkit, this is a size 2.5 Allen key. And again, that should be linked below if you want to pick one up. It's a link that will let them know you're buying from our link, so that they will appreciate that. So 2.5 on these, just get all these out. There's 4 of them. Then a smaller Allen key for the, oh, that one's gone forever, for the embellishments on the side. I'll pull that out in a moment. These are very similar to the old ASUS Strix fans before they changed it for this generation as well. All right, so that was 2.5. I think the embellishments on the sides are probably a 2.0. Yep, 2.0-ish on those. So we've got 2 here and 2 on the other side, and that wind's going to come off. So that much is the same as the previous design. Those don't come out yet. So at this point, what have we taken apart? Okay, there's another couple screws over here. So we have 2 screws on this side. Which side of the card is this? This is going to be on the side opposite the power connector. So this is closer to the I/O. So we have a couple more that are buried in there. And those are Phillips heads. Yeah, that'll work. So large P8 or yeah, Phillips head 1 will work for that. Two of these on the top. Okay, a lot of screws right now. But this is why the mod mat's useful. I have a lot of stuff to put back in later. A whole lot. This is an absurd amount of screws. Is this loose yet? Kind of. There's some separation of stuff. That notch looks like it's there on purpose too. Like to pry or something. I think we're being held up by these embellishments on the side, so I need to figure out how to remove these. Last time I worked on one of these, it snapped. And it may do that again. That is some pretty fragile metal. Yeah, that for sure would snap. I feel like this plastic has to come up. Where's the hiding part? There's got to be a screw somewhere. They really don't want this thing disassembled. Oh, I see screws in there. Okay, so there are screws. You're not going to be able to see them on the camera, but we've identified why this won't come off, fortunately before causing any damage to it. So there are, just if you watch where the screwdriver is going, because you're not going to be able to see it, there's screws in there between the fins and the top part of the shroud, and that's what's holding that plate in. So we're not going to be able to pop that out until we can get those screws removed, which means that this entire thing removes as one unit from the base plate and the vapor chamber. It's just a matter of figuring out how they separate and where. Just seems like it's screwed in. I feel like this probably comes up and reveals a screw somewhere. Man. What the fuck? NVIDIA builds insane cards. NVIDIA's design is like impossible to take apart. It's like an Apple product.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cut that out. Can't take the cooler apart. So
Use the saw.
it's very difficult to maintain it, I guess. I don't know what the fuck. Yeah, so it's like this thing separates, and then this thing separates, and then under that, this thing separates, and then this comes out. Don't touch the thermal pads. Don't know. I don't want to, like, there shouldn't be a screw hiding under a thermal pad. That would be stupid, so. No, that's not it either. Wouldn't surprise me if NVIDIA started like going the route of making custom tools to fix their shit. Yeah, a lot of bike companies do that too. Okay, folks, so this is where we stopped when we got that notice that the teardowns were no longer allowed, and then obviously resumed it later, recording this audio about 12 hours later, or less than that even. So we stopped here at attempting to take apart the cooler, tried another hour or so of pushing on different parts, trying to figure out where it's connected, and for now, you know what, we're just going to leave it as is. If you see something really obvious that I'm overlooking on taking apart the cooler, let us know, but we've looked under every thermal pad, We've pushed on all the different things. The cooler, the vapor chamber itself is loose now, and it appears to be connected by thermal pads, not by solder to the base plate. So it's loose, and it should come free, but at this point, we are going to leave the rest of it together, and we'll look at taking apart this cooler separately in the future. It's been a long night because we got that email about not allowing teardowns after we had already filmed our teardown, most of it anyway, and so we built our whole day around that. Then we had to flip everything and film that architecture video, and so I had video crew working 12 hours, I slept 2 hours, worked all the others. So yeah, we're gonna stop here. Hopefully you're okay with that for this one. Given the circumstances, we would have finished the cooler itself, but that memo did kind of throw a wrench in things. So anyway, we'll talk about the rest of this later, maybe for our hybrid mod. But you've seen the rest of the disassembly for now, so let's cut back to the rest of the video. So for the PCB, this one is a 13 plus 3 phase, and the other card should be an 8 phase for V-Core and a 6 phase for V-Core for the 2070 and the 2080 in opposite order. So this one, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Yes, so 13 plus 3 for core and memory respectively. There are 2 voltage domains on these cards. So you have one for core and one for memory. And for the MOSFETs, they look like onsemi 3170s. And we'll perhaps throw this to BuildZoid for more information on those, but that's what they look like from here. The memory used is Micron memory on this card. We haven't taken apart enough yet to know if there are other suppliers in the field yet, or if it's just Micron to start with. We have a small power regulator over here that'll be discussed more in our ASUS video that handles some VIN and current steering. And then for shunt resistors, we haven't tried a shunt mod on this yet, but if we were to try one, there's a shunt right there, so you got a shunt resistor there, and it looks like there's a shunt resistor there as well. So those should correspond to these. We're just not sure in what order, but those would be your 2 5 milliohm shunt resistors that you could try shorting, and we might do that later. But that's the PCB. That's what we can talk about for now with this, and we might do more later with BuildZoid, or you can check our ASUS video for other information on their PCB. So that's the Founders Edition card. This is NVIDIA's attempt at becoming Apple. They're trying to become the Apple of video cards. It is nearly impossible. I mean, it's not hard to get the PCB exposed. This is not difficult. So if you want to water cool it, getting this far is not hard. If you wanted to take the rest of the cooler apart, maybe for service or maintenance, it's pretty difficult. And just to give you a count, for the screws to my left, not counting the rest of the screws inside of the cooler, there are over 50 of them. I don't have an exact count, but it's between 50 and 55, somewhere in that range, just for the screws to expose this and then start exposing the rest of the cooler. Now, if you're just taking the PCB out, it's probably closer to something like 35 to 40 screws, which is still completely insane, but this is why these cards are expensive. The tooling, or what the factory process, who knows what that costs. Buying 1 million screws and then using thick aluminum in places where you don't necessarily need it, I guess it looks nice and it makes the card really heavy in unnecessary ways. So if you're going for that quality by feel approach, then NVIDIA has achieved that. But man, what a pain to take the cooler apart or even begin to. Getting the PCB exposed, again, not that different from the 1080 series or the 980 series. It's the same process, same screws, same tools. So you need like a 4mm hex, you need a just large Phillips, small Phillips, like PH1, something like that. And then that's more or less it for getting to the PCB. The hex is the big one. And then for taking apart the rest, you need some Allen keys, 2.5, 4.0, stuff like that. So anyway, that's the 2080 Ti Founders Edition card. You have a full teardown now. We have the ASUS card separately on the channel. Definitely check for that. We should already have an architecture piece on the channel if you're interested in the Turing architecture at a technical level and how it all works. We have a video on that. And then benchmarks, if they're not up already, will be up shortly. We had a different embargo for those. So although some testing obviously can occur before the benchmarks release, the unboxings and things like that were allowed to go up earlier, along with the technical white paper discussion, stuff like that. So anyway, subscribe, go to store.gamersnexus.net to pick up the mod mat featured in this video, which, you know, normally I don't necessarily need to put the screws in a diagram anymore. I've done it enough where I don't need to screw track them. For this card, yeah, it's a good idea to have to use my own tools. So you can pick that up on the store, patreon.com/gamersnexus. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. I'll see you all next time.